Alexander Hartwell had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a collection of vintage cars, and a tech empire worth billions. At 33, he built an algorithm that revolutionized global communications, making him one of Fortune's youngest self-made billionaires. Yet as he stood in his marble-floored foyer that Tuesday evening, loosening his Italian silk tie, he felt the familiar emptiness that luxury couldn't fill. The penthouse was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of an antique clock his decorator had insisted would add character. Alexander had arrived home earlier than usual, having walked out of a board meeting that felt particularly pointless. His assistant had looked shocked. Alexander Hartwell never left early. But lately, the endless cycle of acquisitions and expansion strategies felt hollow. He was heading to his study when he heard it, a sound so unexpected in his usually sterile home that he froze mid-step. Singing. Soft, gentle, and coming from the direction of the staff quarters. His maid, Elena Martinez, lived in a small apartment attached to the service wing. In the 2 years she'd worked for him, Alexander had barely exchanged more than necessary pleasantries with her. She was efficient, invisible in the way wealthy people preferred their help to be, and never asked for anything beyond her modest salary. He knew she was 27, had impeccable references, and kept his sprawling penthouse spotless. That was the extent of his knowledge. The singing continued, a Spanish lullaby that seemed to carry both joy and sorrow in its melody. Alexander found himself drawn toward it, his expensive Oxford shoes silent on the hallway carpet. He told himself he was simply ensuring everything was all right. This was his home, after all. But truthfully, something about that voice pierced through the numbness he'd been feeling. As he approached the staff wing, he noticed the door to Elena's apartment was slightly ajar. Warm light spilled into the hallway, so different from the cold LED lighting throughout the rest of the penthouse. Through the gap, he could see her. Elena sat on the floor of her tiny living room, which couldn't have been more than 200 square feet. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a neat bun, fell loose around her shoulders. She was smiling, genuinely smiling in a way Alexander couldn't remember seeing on her face during working hours, at a little girl who sat before her in a homemade high chair. The child was beautiful, with Elena's warm brown eyes and dimpled cheeks. She couldn't have been more than a year old, wearing a little dress that looked handmade, decorated with careful embroidery. Before them sat a tiny cake, clearly homemade, slightly lopsided, with a single candle burning on top. Alexander's breath caught. He hadn't known Elena had a daughter. "Make a wish, mi amor," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Wish for everything Mommy can't give you yet. Wish for a big house with a yard where you can run. Wish for the best schools, the best life. Mommy's working on it, I promise." The little girl, her name was Sophia, he would later learn, reached for the candle with chubby fingers, giggling as Elena gently guided her hand. Together, they blew it out, and Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "1 year old today," Elena murmured, pulling Sophia into her arms. "1 whole year since you made me the luckiest woman alive. You're my miracle, baby girl. My everything." Alexander should have walked away. This was a private moment, something sacred that he had no right to witness. But he couldn't move. He watched as Elena cut a piece of cake, the only piece, he realized, as there was barely enough for one person, and let Sophia smash her fingers into it with delighted squeals. The contrast between this tiny celebration and the lavish parties he'd attended couldn't have been starker. Last month, he'd been to a birthday party where the host had spent $200,000 on ice sculptures alone. There had been caviar and champagne, a live orchestra, and guests who spent the evening checking their phones. No one had looked as happy as Elena did right now, singing Las Mananitas to her daughter in a room that could fit inside his walk-in closet. "I'm sorry it's not more, mi cielo," Elena said softly, wiping cake from Sophia's face with a threadbare cloth. "Next year, Mommy will save more. Maybe we can have 2 candles and some friends over. Would you like that?" Sophia babbled something incomprehensible, and Elena laughed, a sound so pure it made Alexander's chest ache. "You're right, you're absolutely right," Elena agreed, as if understanding perfectly. Who needs fancy things when we have each other? You're all I need, sweet girl. You're everything. She began cleaning up the small celebration, carefully wrapping the remaining cake in plastic wrap. Alexander noticed there were no balloons, no presents piled high, no party decorations beyond a single strand of paper flowers that looked handmade. Yet the love in that small room was more tangible than anything in his vast, empty penthouse. As Elena stood, cradling Sophia against her shoulder, she began to sway gently, humming the same lullaby. Alexander saw her face clearly now, exhausted but radiant, marked by the kind of deep contentment he'd spent his entire adult life chasing and never finding. "We're going to be okay, you and me," Elena whispered into Sophia's dark curls. "Mommy works for a good man, even if he doesn't know we exist. The pay is fair, and he never bothers me. We're safe here, warm here. That's more than I had at your age. We're building something better, little one. Generation by generation, we climb." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. She thought he was a good man, but he didn't even know she had a child. He'd walked past her hundreds of times without really seeing her, never asking about her life, her dreams, her struggles. She called him good simply because he paid her on time and left her alone. Sophia yawned, her little fist curling into Elena's worn t-shirt, and Elena kissed the top of her head with infinite tenderness. "Time for bed, birthday girl. Tomorrow, Mommy has to work early, and you have to be quiet as a mouse, remember?" Quiet as a mouse. Alexander finally stepped back, shame burning in his chest. He retreated to his study, but he couldn't focus on anything. The image of Elena and Sophia, celebrating with so little yet seeming so rich, had imprinted itself on his mind. He pulled up Elena's employment file on his computer. The address listed was his penthouse. She lived on the premises as arranged. But nowhere in the file was there mention of a dependent, no child listed for health insurance, no family emergency contacts beyond her own name. She was hiding Sophia. The realization settled over him like cold water. Elena was raising a child in secret, in a tiny staff apartment, celebrating birthdays with homemade cakes and handmade dresses, all while keeping her daughter invisible to him. The question that haunted him as he sat in his leather chair, surrounded by degrees and awards that suddenly felt meaningless, was simple. Why? Alexander Hartwell had built his fortune on his ability to analyze patterns, to see connections others missed. That skill, which had made him billions, now turned toward understanding the woman who cleaned his home and the child he'd accidentally discovered. Sleep eluded him that night. Instead, he found himself reviewing Elena's file repeatedly, searching for clues he'd missed. She'd been hired 2 years ago through a reputable agency. Her references were sterling. Previous employers praised her work ethic and discretion. The background check had been thorough, revealing nothing concerning. She was a legal resident, taxes properly withheld. Everything by the book. But the file was sparse on personal details. No emergency contacts beyond herself. No listed dependents. Her address prior to employment had been in Queens, a shared apartment based on the records. Nothing about a child, nothing about Sophia. Alexander had always prided himself on being a fair employer. He paid above market rate, offered health insurance, provided comfortable living quarters. Yet he realized now that fair was a low bar when you knew nothing about the people who served you. The next morning, he didn't leave for the office at his usual 6 a.m. Instead, he made coffee, an act he usually left to Elena, and waited in the kitchen. She arrived promptly at 7, as always, her hair pulled back, wearing her simple uniform. She stopped short when she saw him, surprise flickering across her features. "Mr. Hartwell, I didn't realize you were home. Can I prepare your breakfast?" Her English was perfect, only the slightest accent coloring her words. "Elena, please sit down." He gestured to the kitchen island. "I'd like to talk with you." Color drained from her face. In 2 years, he'd never asked her to sit, never requested a conversation. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered herself onto the stool, back straight, eyes downcast. Have I done something wrong, Mr. Hartwell? The fear in her voice made him wince. No, nothing wrong. He paused, unsure how to proceed. All his boardroom confidence evaporated in the face of her obvious anxiety. I came home early yesterday. I heard singing coming from your apartment. Elena's face went completely white. Mr. Hartwell, I can explain. You have a daughter. It wasn't a question. Tears immediately sprang to Elena's eyes. She stood abruptly, her professional composure cracking. Please, I'll find other arrangements for Sophia. I know the lease says no children, but I had nowhere else to go. My sister was supposed to watch her, but she moved to California, and I couldn't afford daycare and… Elena, please sit down. Alexander's voice was gentle. You're not in trouble. I just want to understand. She remained standing, tears now rolling down her cheeks. I needed this job, Mr. Hartwell. I have good references because I work hard, but the moment potential employers know about Sophia, I become a liability. What if she cries? What if I need to leave during an emergency? What if she gets sick? Nobody wants to hire a single mother when they can hire someone without complications. The words poured out now, 2 years of secrecy spilling over. When the agency sent me here, the apartment was perfect. Close enough that I could check on her during the day, quiet enough that she wouldn't disturb you. You work such long hours, I thought I could manage both. Keep Sophia safe and do my job well. I've been so careful. Alexander felt something twist in his chest. Where is she now? Sleeping. She's a good baby, Mr. Hartwell. She hardly ever cries. I've trained her to be quiet. During the day, I have a neighbor, Mrs. Chun from 3B. She watches Sophia for $20 a day. It's all I can afford. But yesterday was Sophia's birthday, and Mrs. Chun had a family thing, so I kept her with me. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again. $20 a day. Alexander's mind raced. That was barely enough to cover basic childcare, certainly not quality care. Mrs. Chun is kind, and she needs the money too. We help each other. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I know this is unprofessional. I'll start looking for another position. Elena, stop. Alexander stood, moving around the island but maintaining a respectful distance. I'm not firing you. I'm trying to understand why you felt you had to hide your daughter from me. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw exhaustion etched into every line of her young face. At 27, she should have been living freely, enjoying life. Instead, she looked decades older, weighed down by responsibility and fear. Because people like you don't want to see people like us, she said quietly. You want clean houses and hot meals and invisible servants who don't have messy, complicated lives. The moment I become human, with human problems, I become disposable. The truth of it stung precisely, because Alexander couldn't deny it. How many times had he passed her in the hallway without asking how she was? How many evenings had she worked late cleaning up after his business dinners without him considering that she might have somewhere else to be? Tell me about Sophia, he said softly. Please. Elena hesitated, then something in his face must have convinced her he was sincere. She sat back down, and Alexander took the stool across from her. She's 1 year old, as of yesterday. She's healthy, happy despite everything. She loves music. I sing to her every night. She's starting to walk just a few steps at a time. A small smile crossed Elena's face. She has her father's eyes, I think, though I try not to think about him. He's not in the picture? He's not anywhere. Elena's voice hardened. He was my boyfriend in college. When I got pregnant, He made it very clear that a baby didn't fit into his life plans. He paid for half an abortion and told me never to contact him again. I couldn't go through with it. Sophia wasn't a mistake to me. She was a miracle. But raising her alone has been harder than I ever imagined. Alexander poured her a cup of coffee, adding cream the way he'd observe her taking it during staff meetings. The gesture seemed to surprise her. I had a scholarship to NYU, Elena continued, accepting the cup with murmured thanks. I was studying business administration, working 2 jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. When I got pregnant, I tried to continue, but morning sickness, then the birth, then a newborn. I had to drop out. Lost the scholarship. Couldn't afford to go back. She stared into her coffee. My parents are in New Mexico. They're good people, but they're struggling themselves. They send what they can, but I don't want to be a burden. I thought I could do this on my own, work, save money, maybe finish school online eventually. Give Sophia the life she deserves. What happened to your previous job? I was working as a housekeeper at a hotel. The pay was terrible, and the hours were worse. When I found out about this position, it seemed perfect. Live-in meant I wouldn't have to pay rent. The salary was 3 times what I was making. I could actually start saving. She laughed bitterly. But the lease specifically said no children. I read it over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. But it was clear. So you lied on your application. I omitted, Elena corrected, then shook her head. No, you're right. I lied. I was desperate, and I lied. I convinced myself it wasn't really lying if nobody asked directly. I told myself I'd find a way to make it work, and I did. For 2 years, I made it work. Alexander absorbed this, understanding dawning. That's why you never take days off. I can't afford to lose this job. Every vacation day unpaid is money I'm not saving for Sophia's future. Every sick day is a risk that you'll realize how complicated my life is. But yesterday was her birthday. Yesterday, I was selfish. Fresh tears welled in Elena's eyes. I wanted one evening where I could pretend we were normal, where I could celebrate my daughter without hiding her, without rushing, without fear. I thought you'd be at that gala. You had it on your calendar. I thought I had time. I left early. Alexander felt the weight of that decision now. I've been doing that lately, leaving early. Everything feels pointless. Elena looked at him with something like understanding. It must be lonely, having everything. The observation was so unexpectedly perceptive that Alexander found himself being honest in return. It is. I built this empire, but I don't know what it's for anymore. My parents passed away years ago. I have colleagues, business associates, but no real friends. I come home to silence every night. At least you have choices, Elena said, not unkindly. I come home to Sophia, and yes, it's hard and scary, and I never have enough money. But I also have purpose. Every day, I'm building something for her. What are you building for? The question hung in the air between them. Alexander had no answer. What does Sophia need? He asked finally. Beyond what you're giving her. Elena shook her head. Mr. Hartwell, I'm not asking for charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm asking a question. He leaned forward. If you could give Sophia anything, what would it be? She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see the internal struggle, pride warring with a mother's desperate love. Safety, she whispered finally. A proper daycare where I know she's being cared for and learning, not just watched. Health insurance that covers her pediatrician visits. I've been using the emergency room because it's all I can afford. Maybe someday, a college fund, so she doesn't have to make the choices I made. Her voice broke. I want her to have options, Mr. Hartwell. I want her to grow up knowing she's worthy of taking up space in the world, not hiding in the shadows. Alexander felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the careful walls he'd built around his heart. "What if," he said slowly, "we revised your employment contract?" The next few days transformed Alexander Hartwell's understanding of his own home. With Elena's reluctant permission, he had his lawyer draw up a new contract, one that explicitly allowed dependents, included comprehensive family health insurance, and came with a substantial raise. Elena had tried to refuse, insisting she didn't want special treatment, but Alexander had been firm. "This isn't special treatment," he'd said. "This is what I should have offered from the beginning." But the contract was just the beginning. On Thursday morning, Alexander did something he'd never done in his adult life. He canceled all his meetings for the day. His assistant nearly dropped her phone when he'd called with the instruction. "All of them, Mr. Hartwell, including the investor call with Tokyo. All of them. Reschedule for next week." Instead of going to his downtown office, Alexander stayed home. He set up his laptop in the penthouse's informal living room, a space he'd never actually used, and tried to work. But he found himself distracted by the sounds of life he'd never noticed before. Elena moved through the penthouse as she always did, efficient and nearly silent. But now Alexander heard other things. A baby monitor she kept clipped to her belt that occasionally broadcast Sophia's babbling, the brief moments when Elena would step into her apartment to check on her daughter, the gentle Spanish lullabies she'd hum while dusting. Around noon, he heard something different. Sophia crying, not the gentle fussing he'd heard through the monitor, but genuine distress. Elena appeared from around the corner, moving quickly toward her apartment, professional composure slipping. "Is everything all right?" Alexander called out. Elena turned, and he saw genuine worry on her face. "I think Sophia might be running a fever. She's usually so happy, but she's been crying for 20 minutes. I'm sorry. I just need to check." "Go," Alexander said immediately. "Take whatever time you need." He tried to return to his work, but Sophia's cries continued, now muffled by the walls of Elena's apartment. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, unable to concentrate, Alexander knocked on Elena's door. She opened it, Sophia in her arms. The little girl was red-faced and crying, and Elena looked close to tears herself. "I think I need to take her to the emergency room," Elena said. "But Mrs. Chen is out of town, and I can't leave her alone, and I know you probably have things to do." "I'll drive you," Alexander said. "Mr. Hartwell, you don't have to." "Elena, stop. Let me help." 30 minutes later, they were in Alexander's Range Rover, Sophia secured in a car seat Alexander had ordered delivered that morning, one of many items he'd researched late into the previous night. Elena sat in the back with her daughter, trying to soothe her, while Alexander drove to Mount Sinai. The emergency room was crowded, the wait time estimated at 3 hours. Alexander watched Elena's face fall as she took in the rows of sick patients, the overwhelmed staff, the fluorescent lighting that made everyone look worse than they felt. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Dr. Richardson? It's Alex Hartwell. I need a favor." 15 minutes later, a pediatrician appeared, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes who'd been Alexander's family doctor years ago and now ran a private practice. She examined Sophia in a private room, while Elena answered questions, her relief palpable. "It's just an ear infection," Dr. Richardson announced. "Common at this age. I'll prescribe antibiotics, and she should feel better within a day or 2. She smiled at Elena. "You're doing a great job, Mom. I can tell she's well cared for." Elena's eyes filled with tears, this time from relief. As they left the hospital, prescription filled at the pharmacy downstairs, Sophia already drowsy from infant pain reliever, Elena turned to Alexander in the car. "Thank you, she said quietly. I don't know how to repay you for this. You don't have to repay kindness, Elena. They drove in silence for a while, Sophia dozing in her car seat. Finally, Elena spoke again. Why are you doing this? Really? Alexander kept his eyes on the road. Because I saw you celebrating Sophia's birthday with a single slice of cake, and I realized I've been living in the same space as you for 2 years without seeing you at all. That's not the kind of person I want to be. Most people don't want to see their staff as fully human, Elena said. It's easier that way. Maybe that's why most people are miserable. When they arrived back at the penthouse, Alexander helped carry Sophia upstairs. Elena moved to take her to their small apartment, but Alexander stopped her. The guest suite has better light and more space. Why don't you settle her there while she's sick? You'll both be more comfortable. Elena hesitated. Mr. Hartwell, I don't want to take advantage. You're not. I'm offering. He softened his tone. Please, Elena, let me do this. She finally agreed, and Alexander found himself watching as she carefully laid Sophia down in the guest suite's king-sized bed, surrounding her with pillows to keep her safe. The little girl looked impossibly small in the vast bed, her dark curls spread across the white pillows. She's beautiful, Alexander said, and meant it. She's everything, Elena replied, gently stroking Sophia's forehead. The fever was already coming down, and the baby's breathing had eased into sleep. I never knew I could love something this much. It's terrifying and wonderful all at once. Alexander thought about his own parents, both gone now, his mother to cancer when he was in college, his father to a heart attack 3 years later. He'd been so focused on building his company, on proving himself, that he'd barely grieved. Looking at Elena with Sophia now, he felt the loss anew. My mother used to say that love is the only thing that multiplies when you share it, he said quietly. I never really understood what she meant until now. Elena looked at him with surprise. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Alexander smiled sadly. She would have liked you, I think. She always said the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do with what they've been given. You have so little, but you give Sophia everything. I wish I could give her more. You give her the most important thing, love. Security. The knowledge that she matters. Alexander paused. Those are things money can't buy. They stood in silence, watching Sophia sleep, and Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose beyond profit margins and market share. Over the next few days, a routine emerged. Elena continued her work, but Alexander found himself more present, more aware. He started working from home more often, taking calls from his penthouse instead of his downtown office. He told himself it was about efficiency, but truthfully, he didn't want to miss Sophia's small moments, her first steps across the living room carpet, the way she'd giggle when Elena sang to her, the pure joy on her face when she mastered stacking blocks. He began joining them for dinner, something that shocked Elena the first time he appeared in the kitchen at 6 p.m. with takeout from a family-style Italian restaurant. I thought we could eat together, he'd said, suddenly uncertain. If that's not too strange. It was strange at first. They'd sit at his massive dining table, a piece of furniture that had never been used for actual family dining, and make awkward conversation. But Sophia, unburdened by social conventions, would babble and laugh, waving her spoon and creating a joyful chaos that somehow made everything easier. Say, Alex, Alexander would encourage, making faces at Sophia, who would giggle and say something that sounded vaguely like Allah. Close enough. He'd laugh, and Elena would shake her head, smiling despite herself. One evening, after Sophia had been put to bed, Elena lingered at the table instead of immediately returning to her apartment. Can I ask you something, Mr. Hartwell? I think after everything, you can call me Alexander. Or Alex. She smiled slightly. Can I ask you something, Alex? Anything. Why don't you have a family of your own? You're successful, kind when you allow yourself to be, not terrible looking. She added that last part with a small smirk that surprised him. Alexander laughed. Not terrible looking? High praise. I'm serious. You're 33. Most people in your position are married with children by now. He was quiet for a long moment. I dated someone seriously in my 20s.
Sarah.
We were together for 3 years. She was smart, beautiful, ambitious. Everyone thought we were perfect together. He swirled the wine in his glass. But she wanted different things. She wanted someone who would be home for dinner, who would prioritize family over work, who would be present. I couldn't be that person then. I was obsessed with building the company, proving I could succeed. By the time I realized what I was losing, she'd already moved on. Do you regret it? Every day. The admission surprised him. I built everything I thought I wanted, and somewhere along the way, I forgot why I wanted it. Now I have money, success, respect, and I'm alone in a penthouse that echoes. Elena nodded slowly. At least you had a choice. I never got to choose between career and family. Life chose for me. But you're happier than I am, Alexander observed. Even with all your struggles, you have something real, something that matters. Sophia is real, but the fear is real too. Every day, I wake up terrified that something will happen, that I'll lose this job, that Sophia will get sick and I won't be able to afford treatment, that I'm failing her by not giving her more. Elena's voice cracked. I'm 27 years old, and I feel like I'm already out of chances. Alexander reached across the table and, for the first time, took Elena's hand. You're not out of chances. Neither of us is. She didn't pull away, and they sat there in the quiet of his penthouse, two people who'd been living parallel lives finally finding a point of connection. That night, lying in his bed, Alexander made a decision. He pulled out his phone and sent an email to his executive team. He'd be transitioning to a remote work schedule, coming into the office only for essential meetings. They could handle the day-to-day. It was time he started actually living instead of just existing. The next morning, he found Elena in the kitchen, preparing breakfast as usual. Sophia was in a playpen nearby, surrounded by the new toys Alexander had quietly been accumulating. I have a proposition, he said. Elena looked up warily. What kind of proposition? I want to hire a proper nanny to help during the day. Someone qualified, background checked, who can teach Sophia and give you breaks. I want to set up a college fund for Sophia. And I want you to consider going back to school, online if you prefer, to finish your degree. I'll cover the costs. Elena set down the pan she'd been holding. Alex, that's too much. It's not enough, he interrupted. Elena, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. It sits in accounts, accumulating, doing nothing meaningful. Let me use it for something that matters. Let me help give Sophia the start you want for her.
Why?
Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Why do you care so much? Alexander looked at Sophia, who was playing happily with a stuffed bear. Because watching you with her reminds me what life is supposed to be about. Not profit margins or market share, but love and connection and building something that matters beyond yourself. He met Elena's eyes. You gave me a gift when I found you celebrating Sophia's birthday. You reminded me what I've been missing. Tears streamed down Elena's face. I don't know what to say.
Say yes.
Let me be part of this, whatever this is. Let me help. Elena wiped her eyes, then walked over to Sophia, picking her up and holding her close. She looked at Alexander for a long moment, weighing something he couldn't quite read. Okay, she said finally.
Yes.
But on one condition. Anything. You have to be genuine in this. Sophia's not a project or a charity case. If you're going to be in her life, you have to really be in it. No disappearing when you get bored or when work gets demanding. She deserves people who stay. Alexander felt the weight of that commitment, but also the rightness of it. I promise. I'm not going anywhere. Sophia reached out toward him, and Alexander took her from Elena's arms. The little girl patted his face with chubby hands, babbling happily, and something in Alexander's chest, something that had been frozen for years, began to thaw. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened steadily, like spring slowly replacing winter. Alexander kept his promise, carving out time in ways that shocked his business associates and delighted the small family growing within his penthouse walls. The first major change was hiring Margaret Chin, no relation to Mrs. Chin from 3B, though the coincidence had made Elena smile. Margaret was a 60-year-old former elementary school teacher with credentials in early childhood development and a grandmother's warm patience. When she'd interviewed, Sophia had immediately crawled into her lap, and Elena had tried not to cry at seeing her daughter so comfortable with someone new. "She knows good people," Margaret had said kindly, and she'd been right. With Margaret's help during the day, Elena enrolled in online business courses through NYU's continuing education program. Alexander watched her transformation with quiet awe, the way she'd sit at the dining table after Sophia was asleep, laptop open, completely absorbed in her studies. She had a mind for strategy and numbers, and her papers on market analysis were sharp enough that Alexander found himself asking her opinion on business matters. "You're wasting your talents cleaning houses," he told her one evening after reading her essay on sustainable business practices. "I'm not wasting anything," Elena corrected gently. "I'm learning that every experience teaches you something. Cleaning taught me attention to detail, efficiency, and humility. Those are skills that matter." Alexander realized she was right. While he'd been born into moderate wealth and had networked his way through elite circles, Elena had fought for every opportunity. Her perspective was invaluable precisely because it was so different from his own. The college fund for Sophia had been established quietly, but when Elena discovered the amount Alexander had deposited, she'd confronted him immediately. $500,000? Her voice had risen to a pitch he'd never heard before. "Alex, that's insane. It's actually quite reasonable for educational expenses these days," he'd replied calmly. "Adjusted for inflation over the next 17 years. I can't accept this." "You're not accepting it."
Sophia is.
"And she can't give it back because she's 1 year old and has no concept of money." He'd smiled. "Besides, it's already done. The fund is irrevocable." Elena had wanted to be angry, but Sophia had chosen that moment to toddle over and grab Alexander's leg, saying "Allah" with such joy that they'd both dissolved into laughter instead. The truth was, having Elena and Sophia in his life had given Alexander something to care about beyond quarterly earnings. He found himself racing home from the rare meetings he couldn't avoid, eager to hear about Sophia's day. Had she learned a new word? Had she managed to stack all 6 blocks? Had Margaret introduced her to finger painting? He started documenting everything with his phone. Videos of Sophia's wobbly first steps, photos of her covered in spaghetti sauce, recordings of her attempting to sing along with Elena's lullabies. His cloud storage, once filled with business presentations, became a timeline of Sophia's growth. "You're becoming one of those parents who shows everyone pictures," Elena teased him one evening. "I'm not her parent," Alexander said automatically, but the words felt wrong even as he said them. Elena studied him thoughtfully. "Aren't you, though? You're here every day. You help with bath time. You read her bedtime stories, and yes, I know you've been practicing Goodnight Moon to get the rhythm right. You've been to more of her pediatrician appointments than most biological fathers attend." "I don't want to overstep," Alexander said carefully. "She has a mother. A wonderful mother who's given up everything for her." "She has a mother who's grateful for a partner," Elena corrected. "That's what you've become, Alex. A partner in this. I was so scared of doing it alone, and now I'm not alone anymore." The word partner settled over Alexander like a warm blanket. It meant something different than business partner, something more profound than he'd expected to feel. As summer turned to fall, Alexander's involvement deepened. When Sophia got sick with a cold, he was the one who stayed up half the night with Elena, taking turns holding her while she coughed. When Sophia took her first independent steps, 5 whole steps, across the living room, Alexander was there to catch her, and his whoop of joy had made both Sophia and Elena laugh. He learned the intricacies of toddler care, that Sophia hated peas but would eat green beans, that she needed exactly 3 stories before bed, no more and no less, that when she was overtired, the only thing that would calm her was Elena's voice singing, Estrelita donde estás, while someone, usually Alexander, swayed with her in the exact rhythm she preferred. His executive team noticed the change. His assistant reported that he seemed happier, more patient, less likely to send emails at 3 a.m. His board members commented that while he was less present physically, his strategic vision had actually sharpened. He made better decisions now, thinking long-term in ways he hadn't before. Having a kid changes you. One board member had joked during a video call, noticing the children's drawings visible on the wall behind Alexander. "She's not Alexander had started, then stopped. "Yes," he'd said simply. "Yes, it does." The penthouse itself transformed. The sterile, magazine-perfect rooms that had once showcased Alexander's wealth now showed signs of actual life. There were baby toys in the living room, children's books on the coffee table, crayon marks on paper taped to the walls, though never on the walls themselves. Elena was strict about that. The formal dining room became a family space where they shared meals, Sophia in her high chair between them, creating joyful chaos. Alexander had the guest suite officially converted into Sophia's room. He'd hired a designer, but Elena had the final say on everything. Together they'd chosen soft yellow walls, clouds painted on the ceiling, shelves for books that Alexander kept filling with new titles. There was a rocking chair by the window where Elena would sit with Sophia, and Alexander had caught himself watching them sometimes, feeling an ache of longing for something he'd never known he wanted. One Saturday in October, Alexander took them to the Central Park Zoo. It was Sophia's first real outing beyond pediatrician visits and quick trips to the park downstairs. Elena had been nervous. So many people, so much stimulation, but Alexander had arranged for early access before the crowds arrived. Watching Sophia's face light up at the sight of penguins waddling around had been worth every favor he'd called in to make it happen. She'd pressed her hands against the glass, babbling excitedly, and Alexander had lifted her onto his shoulders so she could see better. Elena had taken a picture of them, Alexander grinning up at Sophia, Sophia's tiny hands tangled in his hair, both of them looking genuinely happy. Later, sitting on a bench while Sophia napped in her stroller between them, Elena had turned to Alexander with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you for this," she said. "Not just today, but for everything. 6 months ago, I was celebrating Sophia's birthday with a homemade cake in a tiny apartment, terrified you'd discover us and fire me.
Now."
She gestured around them. "Now I'm in Central Park with a man who's become family, watching my daughter grow up safe and loved. I feel like I'm living in a dream." "If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up," Alexander said quietly. Elena reached over and took his hand. It had become natural between them now, these small touches. He'd help her with her coat. She'd straighten his collar before meetings. They'd brush past each other in the kitchen, and the contact felt comfortable, right? "Can I ask you something personal?" Elena said. "Always. Do you ever think about having children of your own? A family in the traditional sense?" Alexander watched Sophia sleep, her little chest rising and falling peacefully. "I used to think I wanted that someday in the abstract. The traditional path, marriage, biological children, the whole package.
But now."
He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Now I think family is what you build, not what you're born into. I look at Sophia, and I feel like her father in every way that matters except biology. I look at you, and I see." He trailed off, uncertain how to finish. What do you see? Elena's voice was soft.
A partner.
A friend. Someone I admire more than anyone I've ever known. He turned to meet her eyes. Someone I'm falling in love with, if I'm being honest. Elena's breath caught. Alex. I know it's complicated, he rushed on. I know we started as employer and employee, and there's a power dynamic that makes this messy. I know I should probably keep my feelings to myself. But I'm tired of living a careful life, Elena. You've taught me that the messy, complicated, scary things are the ones worth holding on to. Tears glistened in Elena's eyes. I've been falling for you too, she whispered. I kept telling myself it was just gratitude, or that I was projecting because you've been so good to Sophia. But it's more than that. When you read to her at night, when you remember that she likes her toast cut in triangles, when you ask about my classes because you actually care about my dreams, that's when I know this is real. Alexander cupped her face gently. I want this to be real. I want us to be real. A real family, if you'll have me. Yes, Elena breathed, and then they were kissing, soft and tentative at first, then deeper, full of all the emotion they'd been holding back. Sophia chose that moment to wake up, babbling indignantly at being ignored. They broke apart, laughing, and Alexander scooped her into his arms. What do you think, Pequeña? He asked in the Spanish he'd been learning from Elena. Should we be a real family? Sophia patted his cheeks and said, Dada. Elena gasped, and Alexander felt his heart stop. Did she just? Her first real word. Elena breathed, tears streaming down her face now. Of course it would be Dada. I didn't teach her that, Alexander said quickly. I would never presume. I know you didn't. She chose it herself. Elena smiled through her tears. Children know love when they see it, Alex. She knows you're her father in every way that counts. Alexander held Sophia close, this little girl who'd entered his life by accident and changed everything. I love you, he whispered to her. I love you both so much. That evening, as they walked back to the penthouse through the autumn twilight, Sophia between them holding both their hands, Alexander realized this was what he'd been missing all along. Not success or wealth or recognition, but this love, connection, the simple joy of belonging to something bigger than himself. He was finally home. The year that followed Sophia's second birthday was the happiest of Alexander Hartwell's life. He and Elena had moved slowly, carefully, building their relationship on a foundation of friendship and shared love for Sophia. There had been no dramatic proposals or rushed decisions. Instead, a gradual intertwining of lives that felt as natural as breathing. Elena had moved out of the staff apartment and into the master bedroom with Alexander 6 months after their first kiss. Sophia's room remained next to theirs, close enough that they could hear her if she called out in the night. The penthouse that had once felt like a museum now felt like a home, full of laughter and music and the beautiful chaos of raising a child. Elena had finished her degree that spring, graduating summa cum laude from NYU's online program. Alexander had thrown her a surprise party, inviting her professors via video call, her family from New Mexico, and their small circle of friends. Sophia had toddled around in a tiny cap and gown that Alexander had custom-made, and Elena had cried happy tears while cutting a cake that said Dr. Martinez in frosting, a preview of the PhD she'd already been accepted to pursue. But Elena had surprised everyone by turning down the doctoral program, at least for now. I want to do something different, she'd announced at dinner one night. I've been thinking about all the women like me, single mothers who are brilliant and capable but can't get their foot in the door because they don't have childcare, don't have flexibility, don't have someone who sees their potential. Her eyes had lit up with passion. What if we started a program? a company that specifically hires single parents, provides on-site childcare, offers flexible schedules, and trains them for real careers in business? We could partner with companies who need talented employees and match them with people who just need a chance. Alexander had listened, watched her lay out the business plan she'd been developing, and fallen in love with her all over again. Within a month, they'd established the Martinez-Hartwell Foundation, with Elena as CEO and Alexander as the primary benefactor and advisor. The first cohort of 20 single parents had started last month, and the results were already promising. But none of that was on Alexander's mind today. Today was Sophia's third birthday, and he was determined to make it perfect. Unlike the secret celebration he'd witnessed 2 years ago, this party was anything but hidden. The penthouse's main living area had been transformed into a wonderland of balloons, streamers, and a custom-built play area. There was a petting zoo set up on the terrace. Sophia's current obsession was animals, a face-painting station, and a 3-tiered cake decorated with her favorite characters. But the guest list was what made it special. Not wealthy socialites or business contacts, but the people who mattered. Margaret Chun and her husband, Mrs. Chun from 3B with her grandchildren, Elena's parents who'd flown in from New Mexico, several families from the Martinez-Hartwell Foundation's first cohort, and Sophia's little friends from the music class Elena had enrolled her in. Alexander stood in the kitchen, adjusting his party hat, a ridiculous cone decorated with princesses that Sophia had insisted everyone wear, when Elena found him. "Hey," she said softly, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "You okay?" "Better than okay." He turned to face her, taking in her beauty. She was wearing a simple summer dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she'd never looked more radiant. "I was just thinking about the first birthday of Sophia's I witnessed. You, sitting on the floor of that tiny apartment with a homemade cake and so much love." Elena smiled, a bit sadly. "I was so scared that night. Scared you'd find out about her, scared I'd lose my job, scared I couldn't give her enough. And now I have everything I never dared to dream of." She reached up to touch his face. "A partner who loves me. A daughter who's thriving. Work that matters. Alex, you gave me back my life." "You gave me a life worth living," Alexander corrected. "Before you, I was just existing. Going through motions, building an empire for no one, coming home to silence. You and Sophia taught me what actually matters." From the living room, they heard Sophia's delighted squeal followed by Margaret's gentle laughter. "We should get out there," Elena said. "Your daughter will notice if her daddy's missing." Alexander's heart still swelled every time someone called him that. He'd legally adopted Sophia 3 months ago, a process that had required Elena's consent and a lot of paperwork. But the judge had smiled when Sophia had called him Dada in the courtroom. "Our daughter," he corrected Elena gently. "Never forget she's ours." The party was controlled chaos in the best possible way. Sophia, now a talkative 3-year-old with strong opinions about everything, held court like a tiny queen. She introduced everyone to everyone, mixed up names charmingly, and insisted that all the adults pet the miniature ponies she'd named Sparkle and Rainbow. Alexander found himself sitting on the floor next to Elena's father, both of them watching Sophia direct the other children in some elaborate game only she understood. "You love my daughter," Roberto Martinez said. "It wasn't a question. More than I knew was possible," Alexander replied honestly. "And my granddaughter? She's my whole heart, sir." Roberto nodded slowly. "When Elena called 2 years ago, told us she was working for some billionaire in New York, I was worried. Worried he'd take advantage. Worried she'd lose herself trying to please someone with power." He turned to look at Alexander directly. "I was wrong about you. You were being a good father," Alexander said. "I would have worried too. You're a good father yourself now. Roberto's eyes crinkled. You know, Elena's mother and I, we couldn't give her much growing up. We worked hard, but there was never enough money for extras. We always felt guilty about that. You gave her something more important than money, Alexander said firmly. You gave her values, work ethic, and love. That's why she's the incredible woman she is. Maybe. Roberta smiled. But you gave her something we couldn't. You gave her a partner who sees her worth, who champions her dreams, who loves our grandbaby like his own. That's not something money can buy, Mijo. That's something special. Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, sir. Call me Roberto. We're family now. Later, as the sun began to set, they gathered around the cake. Sophia stood on a chair between Alexander and Elena, her face glowing in the candlelight. The room full of people sang, "Happy Birthday," and Alexander heard his own voice among them, strong and clear and full of joy. "Make a wish, amor," Elena encouraged. Sophia squeezed her eyes shut with exaggerated concentration, then opened them and declared, "I wish for everybody to be happy forever and ever and ever." "That's a pretty good wish," Alexander said, lifting her down as she blew out the candles with help from both her parents. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Sophia crashed hard, falling asleep on the couch with her head in Elena's lap and her feet in Alexander's. They stayed there, not wanting to move and disturb her, talking quietly. "Do you ever miss it?" Elena asked. "Your old life? The freedom, the simplicity, the ability to do whatever you wanted whenever you wanted." Alexander looked around the room, at the scattered toys and deflating balloons, at the cake smudges on his expensive furniture, at the beautiful woman beside him, and the sleeping child they both loved. "Not even for a second," he said honestly. "That wasn't freedom, Elena. That was just an empty life I was too busy to notice was empty. This," he gestured around them, "this messy, chaotic, wonderful life we've built, this is everything." Elena leaned over Sophia to kiss him. "I love you, Alex Hartwell. I love you, Elena Martinez." He paused. "Though I'm hoping you might consider changing that last name soon." Elena's eyes widened. "Are you?" "Not proposing, not yet. I have something much more elaborate planned for that." He smiled. "But I am saying that when I do ask, I very much hope you'll say yes. You and Sophia are my family. I want to make it official in every possible way." "When you do ask," Elena said, her eyes shining, "the answer will be yes. It's always been yes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sophia sleep, and Alexander marveled at the journey that had brought them here. 2 years ago, he'd come home early and heard singing through a door. He'd discovered a woman celebrating her daughter's birthday with nothing but love and hope. That moment had cracked something open in him, had shown him what he'd been missing. Now his life was full of laughter and tears, of sleepless nights and perfect mornings, of challenges and triumphs, of love so deep it sometimes scared him. He'd found his purpose not in building companies, but in building a family. In being a father to a little girl who'd chosen him just as much as he'd chosen her. In loving a woman who'd shown him that the best things in life can't be bought. They have to be built, day by day, with patience and care and commitment. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked, noticing his expression. "That I used to think I had everything," Alexander said. "But I had nothing. Now I have everything that matters." Sophia stirred, mumbled "dada" in her sleep, and settled deeper into their laps. Alexander thought about that scared young woman he'd seen through a doorway, celebrating in secret, hoping for a better future for her daughter. She'd been wrong about one thing. She told baby Sophia that she'd give her everything she could. But it turned out Elena had already given Sophia everything she needed: unconditional love, unwavering support, and the courage to dream. The rest, the safety, the resources, the opportunities, those were just bonuses. Important, yes, but secondary to the love that had been there from the very beginning. As Alexander sat there with his family, he made a silent promise. He would never forget that love was the foundation of everything they'd built. He would never let wealth or success or the demands of business pull him away from what mattered most. He would be present, engaged, committed, not just to Sophia, but to Elena, to the life they were creating together. The penthouse that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with life and love. And Alexander Hartwell, who'd once had everything money could buy but nothing that mattered, finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. He had a family. He had purpose. He had love. He had everything. Months later, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Alexander proposed to Elena in the same small apartment where he'd first seen her celebrate Sophia's birthday. He'd had it furnished exactly as it had been that night. Same secondhand furniture, same paper flowers, same tiny table. In the center was a homemade cake with a single candle. "This is where I fell in love with you," he told her as she cried. "Not in the penthouse, not in some fancy restaurant. Here, watching you love your daughter with everything you had. That's when I knew you were extraordinary." "Yes," she said before he could even finish asking. "Yes, yes, yes." Sophia, now 3.5 and very wise, applauded and declared, "I knew it. I'm going to be a flower girl." They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Elena's hometown in New Mexico, surrounded by family and friends. Sophia was indeed the flower girl, and she took the job very seriously, telling everyone within earshot that this was the most important job in the whole world. The Martinez-Hartwell Foundation continued to grow, creating opportunities for hundreds of single parents and their children. Elena became a sought-after speaker on social entrepreneurship, while Alexander learned that his greatest contribution wasn't his technology, but his willingness to invest in people others had overlooked. But the best moments were still the simple ones: bedtime stories and breakfast chaos, dance parties in the living room, and quiet evenings after Sophia was asleep, the ordinary magic of being a family. And every year on Sophia's birthday, no matter how elaborate the celebration, they would end the night the same way, just the three of them, with a simple cake and a single candle, remembering where they'd started and celebrating how far they'd come. Together.